on Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
You're listening to The Jan Price Show, and today my guest is Dawn Porter, who is a documentarian filmmaker, and we're talking about her new documentary, which is so timely, John Lewis, Good Trouble. Welcome to the show, Dawn.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. This movie couldn't come out at a better time, could it?
It could not. I think, I wouldn't wish this time on anyone, but I'm glad that it's coming out now when I think people are really ready to think about our times in a different way and to think about what they can do, to really make the kind of society that they want.
I think this time around, too, more than others, and, I don't want to date myself, but...
Just don't date me.
Okay, I won't date you. But, we've gone through, this through centuries, it seems like, for many, many decades. And each time there's incremental change. But I feel this time, and I really want to get your perspective on this, that I think this time we're really, the whole world is shaken up anyhow. This has been 2020 has been a fascinating year for everyone on so many different levels. But our old paradigms are being broken up and new ones are being created. And that the fact that all of this, George Floyd and everything, it was just a time when it was just all was coming together because people had been in their homes for 3 months or 2 months. And then to have that happen, for everybody's sensibilities, I think we were all enraged by what had happened. And I think now with everybody just really continuing to do these marches almost every night. And I really believe that we're going to have some deeper changes going on in this country and the world too. It's not just our country that is going through this; it's the world. So what's your perspective on what's going on right now?
One of the things that I've been thinking about lately is how connected we all are. We are, negatively connected by a virus, which knows no borders. But then we're positively connected by this respect for human rights, by this desire to be better, by this desire to, examine our past behavior and to create the kind of society that we all want to live in. And so, I think I've gone through the gamut of emotions. It felt like between pandemic and, all the social unrest that it could be overwhelming at times. And so, I've been really trying to think about what is my place personally and professionally in creating a world I want my children to live in. Because we're not all people who march in the streets. We're not all people who are going to, jump on a soapbox or make big speeches. But so I've been really thinking about what feels right for me, and how, I can live in a way that I'm proud of. And I think that is part of John Lewis's legacy, which is he really, as a very young person, decided how he was going to live his life. And then he went and did it. And I think that having stories like that and remembering that there are people who accomplish their goals in such a giving way is, I think that's the kind of story that we need to remember, that there are more of those than we're paying attention to. Our news can seem really relentless. And I think what the John Lewis story does is allows us to take a breath, to step back. And, one thing I love about his story is we know that it works out well in the end. The good people win. And, and then that we all win. John Lewis didn't do things that only lifted himself up. He did things that lifted all of us up.
Beautifully said, beautifully said. And again, as I said at the top, this is so timely. So let's talk a little bit about how, his story. Obviously, many people are familiar with his story, but you have so many things that people are not familiar with in this documentary. And the documentary is absolutely wonderful. And again, as I said, coming out at the perfect time. Normally documentaries take many years to put together, 4 or 5 years that people are working on documentaries. But this one came together relatively quickly. Why do you think it came together so quickly? And again, did you have any idea at the time when you were creating this that this film, this documentary was going to be coming out at a time when it was really, the message is something that we all need to hear, and particularly right now, even more than other times, it seems like.
I think that's right. I had been working on, I had just finished a series for Netflix about Bobby Kennedy. And during the making of that series, I was just kind of swimming in this archive of the time and watching, a world that was so tumultuous and so uncertain. And so it was really natural for me to go from the Bobby Kennedy Project to examining the path of advocacy from the perspective of the activist, the advocate, So Kennedy coming from such a privileged family, from such, an important and powerful perch. John Lewis came from the opposite side, and yet they had the same goals. And in fact, that, they worked together. So I was just kind of ready to move on to more of that individual story, and a story from, one of the greatest African-American activists of our time. So, I think also many people know about John Lewis's bravery. If they know who he is, they know that he was beaten on the Selma Bridge by, the troopers. They might know that he was a freedom rider who got on those buses and then was beaten by an angry mob. Or they might know that he was part of the sit-in movement in Nashville. But what I wanted to do was tie all those things together and have people see how so strategically and continuously and consistently the congressman went from one action to the next into what amounts to a life of service. So, I wanted to I think that's what I love about documentaries. You can give some context to some of these individual iconic moments. And that's what I was trying to do. And as far as the timing, I mean, we really wanted, and this also speaks to how relatively quickly this project came together. I mean, we worked on it for about 2 years, but we really wanted to emphasize voting rights, which has always been one of John Lewis's, most important objectives. And so for that reason, we were trying to time it to come out before the election. People would really be thinking about the importance of voting and how much he'd sacrificed. But, as it turns out, like so much of Mr. Lewis's life, so many more of the lessons of his life are so relevant today. Speaking out, being brave, being strategic, being compassionate. What does compassionate leadership really look like? What is a life of service, real service? What does that look like? And I think, it's really been difficult for so many people in the time of this pandemic. But if there's any silver lining to it, being home perhaps gives us a little more, an opportunity to spend some time with our family members, to maybe think about things in a deeper way. And so I hope that people will enjoy this film with their families. And I hope as they're trying to make sense of so much of the civil unrest that's happening around the country, that they'll look at what accomplishments happened as a result of unrest in a different time.
And it's too bad that we need to go through these things in order to have change happen. That we have to have these events, and they continue to happen to get everybody, to pull together and help affect change, in the long run.
It is. And, the sacrifices of some are much greater than for many of us. And, there is a distinct difference between John Lewis and the other civil rights activists willingly and intentionally putting themselves in harm's way in order to, call attention to a cause. And that is unfortunately not the case for, a George Floyd or a Ahmaud Arbery or a Breonna Taylor or so many of these other people whose lives were taken against their will and under violent circumstances. So while we can't equate those instigating occurrences, I hope that at a minimum we can learn from them. And also I would love though to focus on how much the activities of the civil rights movement were able to be successful and how we are still living with the benefits of the movement. And that does not mean that the movement is over. It's so far from it, and right. I think, when I talk to Mr. Lewis, one of the things that he continuously emphasizes is he doesn't see equality as something that you would achieve and then be done with it. He sees it as a lifelong pursuit of always looking and seeing how we can improve and make circumstances better for the least well off, in our society. So I think for many of us, maybe we got a little complacent, maybe things were okay enough. And I certainly, in some ways can put myself in that category. Maybe things were, we didn't feel the need to be marching in the streets as consistently. Maybe that's a good thing. I take nothing from the horrible tragedy for the families of people who have lost their lives or been injured. And so I don't mean to insult their memory in any way. But if there is any good that can come of that, I hope it is that, we will all be vigilant about trying to not allow other families to experience that pain. And as you say, it would be, wouldn't it be great if we could get to a place where we don't have to have a tragedy as the inciting incident, where we're so used to living with working for change that is second nature. So.
What's interesting about this, about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all of the names, there's so many of them, that there's, we've had other times when other Black men have died at the hands of police, and there's been many other marches and things that have gone on throughout our country at other times, but there's something different about this time. Very different. It's much deeper this time. And I think perhaps because of exactly what you're saying, that time during the pandemic, I think that there are a lot of good things that are going to come out of this pandemic. I mean, I know it's been hard on a lot of people, very difficult time and trying time. But I think if we look at, Miss Pollyanna, at the positives of it, and part of that is the reflection, that taking the time to reflect and to rethink and redo. I mean, I think all of us are shifting our lives in a different way than we did 3 months ago. I think we've all been awoke, even more so. Because we've had quiet time.
That's right. I think that's right. I mean, when I think of my just personal daily routine, which used to involve, commuting and a lot of rushing, now it involves a lot of walking with my dog, outside, which is kind of a nice way to set and to really kind of, instead of tumbling into a day, like setting an intention for a day. And, I remember, so we, filmed with Mr. Lewis for over a year, and we took him home, to Alabama, met his siblings. We spent time with him in his home in Atlanta, his home in DC. So I saw him filmed with him in Congress. We filmed with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ayanna Pressley, Cory Booker, and Hillary Clinton. So I saw him in a variety of circumstances. And what's so striking about John Lewis is he is the same person in all of those circumstances. He is he is simultaneously fierce and steady, but he's also a very calm person. Mm-hmm. So and I think, the more I thought about this and had time to reflect on what I saw over that year of filming is, John Lewis studied philosophy and religion. That was his college major at Fisk. And then he also has a degree from a divinity school. So he did not casually begin his career as an activist. This was a very learned and studied and intentional process for him. And because of that, he really made a conscious decision about how he wanted to go about doing his work, not just whether he wanted to do civil rights work, but how he wanted to do it. And because of that, he's just very peaceful. He's living his life the way that he planned. And there is so much power in that. And that is so striking to me. When he talks about nonviolence being powerful, that is when you are choosing, that is your choice over how you respond. We interviewed Representative Jim Clyburn in the film, and he gave us a beautiful interview along with Representative Elijah Cummings, but each of them pointed out that, how important it is that John Lewis has always made his own choices. And I think that that's really what we're all looking to, right? Mm-hmm. To have the ability to choose what we feel is right for our lives.
It's beautiful message and one we need to hear. And it's a wonderful film. And I do want to get into why you chose to do a movie about him. But I just want to say for people who are just tuning in, you are listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies. And my guest today is Dawn Porter. And we're talking about her new documentary, John Lewis, Good Trouble. By the way, how did you come up with that title, Good Trouble?
Good Trouble was always going to be the title. It is kind of Mr. Lewis's, calling card when he was a young boy, and I think this is important for us to remember. It was literally, he was literally living in a time of terror in the Black Belt South in Alabama, in a little town called Troy, where your goal as a Black person was to keep your head down. And as his parents said, don't get in trouble, which meant don't disturb the white people. Don't make them angry. And you could make them angry by looking a white woman in the eye. You could make them angry by asserting your full humanity. And so that didn't really sit well with the congressman as a teenager. And, he kind of turned that on its head and said, well, if I'm going to get in any trouble, it's going to be good trouble. It's going to be necessary trouble. It's going to be the kind of trouble that shakes things up for a good reason. So it's his calling card, and it just, I think suits his story just so perfectly, because he's still getting in good trouble.
Yes, he is. And it's a great title. So what made you decide to do a documentary about John Lewis? How did this come about, this project?
Yeah, I know the executives at CNN Films. This is a CNN Films project, and I think were very happy with their documentary about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the RBG film. So, I love that movie. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I tease them that they were just looking for more interesting 80-year-olds. So, here was another one. So they, came to me. I think they had seen the Bobby Kennedy series and knew, and realized that there were some movies, but there weren't really a lot of movies that really traced his, origin and history, and spoke to his inspirations. And, what I brought to it is I really wanted to make the point that he is still a legislator. He's still an elected congressman, and show what is it like for an activist to become, to morph into the halls of power. So that is also very much part of the John Lewis story. These are the executives at CNN are women that I really admire. And so we had, once I kind of explained the vision, they were on board with it. We brought on, I have my producer, Laura Michael Chissen, who's worked with Robert Redford forever and is a great producer. And then Erica Alexander and Ben Arnon from Color Farm. They were also thinking about doing a documentary about Congressman Lewis. So it was just like the worlds just aligned. We all joined forces. And I like to say, like, sometimes the documentary gods are with you. This is one of those times when, I feel like as you say, none of us planned for this. But isn't it just so perfect that this movie is giving people an opportunity to explore our history this way?
It's timely. I mean, it couldn't be more timely at all. How did when you approached John Lewis, what was his when he was approached to have a documentary made about him? How did he respond to that?
I think he was ready. I mean, I think he was, at this stage in his career and his life, I think he's quite aware of how important his legacy is. I think he was familiar, he certainly was familiar with CNN films and was familiar with some of my other work. Kind of ironically, he had appeared in my first film, Gideon's Army, about public defenders. He was in my Bob and Kennedy piece. So it was only a matter of time before I could get to Mr. Lewis. So he was on board. He was game. And he's such a trooper. I mean, we asked him to go back to Alabama. We asked him to be with him on election night. We were in his office all the time. And there is no one who is a harder worker than that congressman. I mean, he kind of wore us out a little bit. So, but I think he was ready. I think he had really been thinking about his life. And I think he was ready to kind of look back even as he was looking to the future for what's necessary. I also know that he had been doing a lot of mentoring of some of the younger people in Congress, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, Cory Booker. I know that he Antonio Delgado. I know that he spent quite a bit of time. He reached out to all of those people as they came into the Congress. And he did it in his particular style, which is it quietly, not in the public eye, but that meant a lot to them. That somebody with such a storied personal story and a storied history in the Congress would take the time to reach out to the newer folks.
It just says a whole lot about his character and about who he is, which we all know.
I think it does. Yeah, I think it does.
I have time for just one quick question. We got about a minute, and then I also want to let people know, first before we ask that last question, let people know where they can see John Lewis, Good Trouble. Where can people see this film?
Yes, we are being released on July 3rd. So what is more patriotic and American than the John Lewis story? So
yes.
It will be available on streaming platforms, iTunes and Amazon and a number of other locations. For specifics, you can go to makegoodtrouble.com, and that will tell you more about the film and where it's located. And then I am terribly proud to be part of CNN's feature films debuts in the fall. So that will be in the third week of September on CNN Films. We will have John Lewis, Good Trouble.
Wonderful. Well, everybody should see this film, and there's the perfect timing right now, especially coming out on July 4th. So, Dawn, thank you so much. I wish you much success with this film, and I look forward to having you back on the show with your next film.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Me too. Like The Jan Price Show on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Jan Price Show. You can also listen whenever and wherever on thejanpriceshow.com and also on the iHeart Podcast Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. Thank you all for listening.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1, streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.